was a mother to 4 children. She loved spending time with her grandchildren, but behind the happy granny persona was a trail of death and murder. Nanny Doss was born Nancy Hazel on November 4th, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. She was one of 5 children born to James and Louisa Hazel. Her father was very controlling as a husband and as a father, and it is reported that both Nancy and her mother absolutely hated him. He was super strict. As his daughters got older, they were not allowed to wear makeup. They had to wear very, plain clothing that just covered up every inch of their bodies. He thought that if his daughters were not attractive, then men would never have the urge to molest them. James would force his children to work on the family farm instead of allowing them to go to school, and this would result in his children performing very poorly academically. When Nanny was 7, her family took this trip to see relatives in southern Alabama, and they took a train. During this train ride, the train stopped abruptly, and Nanny hit her head on a metal bar that was on the seat in front of her. For years after this happened, she suffered from severe headaches, sudden blackouts, and depression. She would blame these symptoms as well as her mental instability on this accident on the train. So while she didn't regularly attend school, she did love reading, and she was often found with one of her mother's romance magazines, and she loved to kind of daydream about her own romantic future. She also loved reading the Lonely Hearts column, and it seemed like she kind of used these romance novels and magazines to escape from her controlling father. When Nanny was 16 years old, she married a man named Charlie likely a food poisoning incident. Soon after this, Charlie takes their oldest daughter, Malvina, and leaves Nanny. So Nanny is left alone with her newborn daughter, and this daughter's name was Florine. Right around this time, Charlie's mother had also died. So he takes off and she gets a job in a cotton mill to try to make ends meet for her and her baby. Then Charlie returns with Malvina, and he also has this new woman in tow who was a divorcee who had her own child, and at this point, Nanny and Charlie get divorced. Charlie would later say that the reason he had left was because he was scared of Nanny. In 1929, Nanny meets her second husband, a man named Robert Franklin Harrelson. So they got married and they lived together in Jacksonville with her two daughters, Malvina and Florine. Now, it didn't take her long to realize her new husband was a raging alcoholic, and he also had a criminal history for assault. So this was a very turbulent marriage. He drank a lot, he hit her. Even though it wasn't great, the couple stayed married for 16 years. Nanny's children grew up, and soon she was a grandmother. Malvina gave birth to a little boy in 1943 who she named Robert, and about 2 years later, she gave birth to another little boy. Now, it was a very long labor. She was exhausted from giving birth, and she kind of woke up and she thought she saw her mother shoving a hat pin in her newborn's head. But she had been having all of these really weird dreams, and she kind of rolled back over and went to sleep. And then when she woke up, her husband told her that their baby had died. She is asking her husband, did my mom have a hat pin? Like, did I imagine this? And he said that they had seen her mother with a hat pin, but the doctors were never able to give a reason for the infant's death. The pain from losing her baby was just too much for Malvina and her husband, so they kind of slowly drifted apart and then divorced. Then Malvina began dating this soldier, and her mother hated this guy, and it really became a source of contention between mother and daughter. I think that because her father had been so controlling of her, she was very overbearing and controlling of her own children. But Malvina was an adult, and she wanted to date this soldier, and she did, but there was just a lot of really big fights surrounding the issue. One day, they got into a huge argument about Malvina's boyfriend, and then Malvina left, and I think she was leaving to go meet the boyfriend. I'm not 100% sure on that, but she leaves her surviving son with her mother and kind of storms out. Her son same year, World War II ended, and everyone was celebrating. And Nanny's husband was celebrating a little too hard. He was drinking even more than he normally did. And he ends up raping Nanny. And this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. She was done with him. So she takes this bottle of whiskey and puts rat poison in it, shakes it up, and puts it back. And her husband died that same night. Nanny met her third husband, Arlie Lanning, through a Lonely Hearts column in a magazine, and she married him just 3 days after she met him. She seemed to really kind of have a type of man that she ended up with, because he was just like her second husband. He was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer. So this marriage was not great. Sometimes Nanny would just up and leave for weeks at a time. But then she would come back and she would pretend to be this perfect housewife and like dote on her husband. When her husband died of what was believed to be heart failure, everyone in town felt so bad for this sweet older woman that they really kind of rallied around her. When Arlie died, his house had been left to his sister, and the house mysteriously burnt to the ground, and Nanny collected the insurance money. After coming into the money, Nanny decided to go visit her sister Dovey, who was very, very ill and bedridden. She made this big show to go take care of her and to be there for her. But soon after she arrived, Dovey died. Nanny really didn't like being alone, so soon she was looking for another husband, and this time she used a dating service. Through this dating service, she met Richard L. Morton of Jamestown, North Carolina. They married in 1952, and he wasn't an alcoholic, but he was a cheater, and soon she realized she was gonna have to kill him. So she made plans to poison him, but before she actually poisoned her husband, she poisoned her mom. Then she killed her husband, so her mom came to visit, and she killed her mom, and then she killed her husband. Nanny then married Samuel Doss in 1953, and he was a minister. He had lost his entire family in this tornado in Kansas. So he marries Nanny, but right away he really disapproves of her romance novel obsession, his death raised some red flags, and his doctor ordered an autopsy. See, this doctor who had treated Samuel when he had been hospitalized had suspected some foul play, but he could never find any way to prove it. But the autopsy revealed a massive amount of arsenic in Samuel's system, and as soon as these results came in, Nanny was arrested. Once Nanny was arrested, she just kind of started confessing. She confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother, her sister, her grandson, and her mother-in-law. Police began exhuming Nanny's previous victims, and they found large amounts of arsenic in their bodies. The state of Oklahoma created a case on Samuel Doss's death. He was the only one she was actually charged with murdering. She pled guilty to killing her husband and was sentenced to life in prison. Now, they did not pursue the death penalty because she was a woman, so I guess they weren't even gonna try to go for the death penalty. Police did believe that Nanny was responsible for 12 deaths, and most of these victims were blood relatives of hers, her kids, her grandson, and other family members. She blamed her behavior on a head injury she had sustained as a child, and I really do think there is something to this. I talked about this a little bit in the Fred and Rosemary West case, but there is kind of been a lot of studies done on the link between head injuries, concussions, and your impulse control. Anyway, Nanny had kind of a surprising motive for killing her husbands. It wasn't money. It kind of seemed like these romance novels had a very profound effect on her. And she said, quote, "I was searching for the perfect mate, the real romance in life," end quote. So when one husband wasn't working out, she just killed him and moved on to the next one. And because most of her husband's